Hi everyone, so in this video I'm going to give you some really good tips to help you get 16 marks easily with the behavioural approach, and this will also be good for 8 marks, and at the end I'll just quickly show you how to do that as well. So let's start with the AO1 points, okay, for 6 marks. Now these are the 3 things which you need to get in for 2 marks each, and it's really important that you don't overwrite here. You start with the basic principles, which are going to be on my next slide. Then you describe what is classical conditioning without going into too much detail with Pavlov and the dogs. If you waste your time talking about Pavlov and the dogs in too much detail, it won't help you. And you must give an example of human behaviour, okay? Then you go on to do the operant conditioning, and again, don't spend too much time talking about Skinner's rats. I'm going to show you how to do that, and you give an example of human behaviour. So on my next slides, I've got some good examples and some good ways in which you can do that. So let's begin with the principles, okay? Let's begin with what this model or this approach is all about. I would start with this point. They are only concerned with observable behaviors here. That means that it was a big change in psychology, okay? Because before this approach began, and this approach began around the 1920s, so before this approach began, all psychologists, and they probably weren't called psychologists then, they might have been called psychoanalysts or so on, they were concerned with thought or the mind. It was all about Freud and the psychodynamic approach. So this was a new phenomena in psychology. So they are not interested in our thoughts or the mind or in Freud's ideas. It was a revolution in psychology. So just begin with that. Then you want to turn to classical conditioning. Now, here's an example of it using a rather cute looking dog. Of course they weren't. It was horrible experiments, by the way, Pavlov's research. I mean, if you really want to see the horrors that were going on to those poor animals, you can Google it. But anyway, here you are going to discuss what is this sort of conditioning. Now, big mistake that students make, so please don't do this. Don't waffle on about all the unconditioned responses, neutral stimuli, conditioned stimulus, conditioned, unless you can do it short and sweet. Okay, so short and sweet would be just to explain that this experimentation was done with animals, and it was done mostly with dogs, and the idea was, and again, don't go into too much detail, that the dog would have an unconditioned stimulus, food, and it would salivate. Then it would be given a neutral stimulus that was a bell, and there would be no response because the bell meant absolutely nothing to the dog. It was just a noise. Then, this is the most important phase, you would have the bell with the food, and the dog would have a response, but it was unconditioned to begin with, okay? They would start to salivate because of the food, not because of the bell. But, you know, this would need to go on for quite a few times, no set times. And then eventually, after conditioning, then the dog would immediately salivate when there was only a bell. So just the bell, no food anymore, just the bell. And this is now a conditioned response. So that's how the classical conditioning works. And you can explain that simply. But you won't get the marks unless you give an example from real life. Okay? And let's just go on to, to my next slide here. Right, so this experiment with little Albert, now I've got a picture here from the internet. I couldn't find one, of course, of little Albert because there isn't one, but this is the scene basically. There was a baby, there was some researchers, this was a guy called Watson and his girlfriend, okay, called Raina, all sorts of stuff going on there. And basically there was a very young baby, about, like a year old, with, not a rabbit by the way, with a rat. Okay, so what they did was they introduced the baby, who was not their baby, they were sort of babysitting for this child called Little Albert, and they introduced Little Albert to a rat, actually, who was a very nice, friendly pet rat, a white rat, and Little Albert was super happy with the little rat. However, what they did then was they introduced a horrible noise, okay, behind the baby that was actually like a hammer being sort of hit on, on some sort of a metal thing, or I don't know what it was now, but anyway, you can Google it all, and it was a scary noise for the baby. And so every time they actually brought in the rat with the noise, that was a way to condition the baby would be scared. And so, eventually, every time the baby saw the rat alone, there would be a conditioned fear response. So that's a real-life experiment done with humans, not with animals. Very unethical, but you don't even need to mention that here. That's on the AO3 point, and I will sort of bring those in later. Here's the main point, though. There are real and observable behaviours in human beings which are conditioned. So I would mention phobias. You want to go for phobias here. Okay, so phobias are absolutely conditioned, and you can mention sort of fear of heights, or fear of anything at all, like spiders or anything. There is a potential that it will be a classically conditioned response. Okay, so let's now move on to operant conditioning. So let's move on to operant conditioning. So when we're concerned about this, we are obviously going to have to use Skinner and talk about the rats. Okay, now once more, don't go into too much detail. Don't talk about the whole experimental conditions, or you're going to waste your time. You only need 6 marks. So you want to discuss that these rats were obviously given reinforcement, okay? So, and that was food. So food was given to them where they would be made to do behaviours more. They were given punishments. It were horrible stuff like shocks, electric shocks, which would decrease their behaviour. That's all there is to it, really. And all the tricks they were made to do. You can Google all that and you can learn about that, but you don't need to put it in here too much. So that was highly controlled experimental support that we can operantly condition people to do things more or to do things less, okay? However, you need to put this into real life context here to get your AO1 marks. Why? Because you're not being asked about animal behaviour. You are supposed to be talking about humans here. So let's go on to that. So in the real life, everyday context here, we're going to discuss school, because school is a place where everybody is operantly conditioned. It starts very early on. We've got some older kids here in America, but obviously this starts from the very beginning of our school life. So we are openly conditioned by being given rewards. This may be actual things like sweets and so on, or it may be just stars in our books, or loads of, sort of encouragement from the teacher, praise and so on. Well, this will make us do things more. And obviously to make us not do behaviours, we are given detentions or put in the naughty corner or anything such as that. So that is a real life application of operant conditioning. And this goes on all through school life. You're given, rewards when you do things well. You're given assemblies and given prizes. Or you might be still given detentions even when you're much, much older, because it works. It really works. It helps students not do things that we don't want them to do in school, and helps them to do things that we do want them to do, all for their good, obviously. So this is operant conditioning in real life. Now, when we're going to evaluate this approach, keep it simple, and you may want to take a few notes. First of all, it made psychology a credible science from the 1920s onwards. It was lab. It was lab experiments. It was therefore experimentally valid, and there was replication. So it was scientific. Okay, so before this model, there was Freud, and you all know, and again, check out my video, that, you know, one of the major minus points for Freud's fantastic model is that he used case studies and it wasn't scientific. So this is a plus here. All right, real life applications are a second plus point. And I've just mentioned those, okay? So again, you can, you know, maybe talk about school, okay, for operant conditioning. And you can also discuss, I may want to make a note of this, that when you've got a phobia, you can be deconditioned. That's a real life application. Okay, so these are really positive things that are coming from this model. Now, what about minus point? There is environmental determinism. Okay, and again, you need to look at the video I've done about free will determinism to get some more points on this. But the main thing is that this is a very deterministic model, but it's environmentally determinist. In other words, it's about things around you which you cannot control have given you a phobia, right? Or, you know, even with the operant conditioning, school has made you do these behaviours, you could argue, by giving you rewards. And not in a bad way, of course. It's you know, it's all for your good, to make you get the good grades and have a great life, and etc., etc. But still, it is still environmental determinism. You are not in control. Second thing is, it's a mechanistic model. It is saying that we are like a robot. We are just responding to our environment, and therefore we are not in control. And the other thing about mechanism is that it is not supported by other models. So you can also bring in that models like the social learning approach say that we are not mechanistic. We are actually having an input into things which we learn. So you need to look at my next video on that one. And finally, a real negative thing is the horrible use of non-human animals in the research. That's an ethical issue. It's absolutely good. It's not in many revision books now because they've removed non-human animals as an issue, and it is one of the biggest issues in psychology. However, I will bring it in if I were you. And you need to say this, that, you know, we are using animals in completely unethical, you know, sort of ways here, and we don't need to use non-human animals. We can experiment on humans, and then we would be more ethical, because obviously little Albert was not good either. I'm not saying little Albert was good, guys. I'm saying that if we do really ethical experiments and we only use humans, and here's the big AO3 point, then we can apply it to humans. So not just the ethics, but the application of this theory to humans is suspect. Okay, because we need to have humans in this stimulus response environment, and we need to have them operantly conditioned. Okay, so we know it applies to humans now, okay, because we have things like school and so on. But these original research, okay, was using animals and, you know, was arguing that, you know, this can be applied to humans, and there's a big question mark over that. Right, okay, so I do hope that was very useful for you, and I wish you lots of luck.